Did we pray?
A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our friends. We are so thankful that you have taken the time to tune in to another Let's Talk. I am delighted to be with you. We have a panel of guests who will be sharing today. I'm looking forward to this discussion. It's part 2 of our abortion discussion. But before we go into it, and even before I introduce our guests for today, I'd like to invite you to have a word of prayer with us. Father, we pray that you will be with us as we share with our friends, those listening via the World Wide Web, whether it be YouTube or Facebook, those streaming on Second Advent or listening to 101.5 FM. We welcome all of our friends and pray that you will grant that the information presented will prove meaningful in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this afternoon we have a number of guests with us. I first want to introduce again attorney Natasha Baker. She is no stranger to you on Let's Talk here. Sister Natasha, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk again.
Good afternoon. Thank you to Dr. Greene.
All right. Then we have with us Sister Beverly Chan, who is the CEO of Davis Memorial Hospital. Sister Chan, good afternoon. Welcome to Let's Talk.
It's my pleasure. Good afternoon.
We also have with us the Women's Ministries Director for the Caribbean Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, Sister Deborah Henry. Sister Henry, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we had another guest, but it looks like she has slipped out. I'm not sure if it's an internet connection, but let's hope that our physician will rejoin us shortly. But we are going to begin. Okay, I think our doctor will join us soon. But we're gonna go into this discussion. A few weeks ago, it may be 3 or so weeks ago, we started a discussion on abortion. We had then a gynecologist, Dr. Henry. She is not able to join us this afternoon. We have a family physician joining us in a little bit, but we are grateful that we can continue the discussion. In part 1, we looked at the definition of pregnancy and abortion and some of the medical implications. We also looked at some legal implications. Next week, I will take I'll talk with the gynecologist specifically about other issues relating to pregnancy and termination of the same. We already, I believe, know that in general terms, abortion is not to be encouraged. But today, I want us to look at the issue of some special circumstances where it might be okay or advisable for abortion to take place. Let's just run straight into our discourse for this afternoon. I want to look at the special circumstances I referenced just a minute or so ago. Situations where there may be a rape, somebody getting pregnant as a result of such an unfortunate occurrence. You may have a situation where there is incest, or maybe even the mother's life, maybe an ordinary pregnancy, but the mother's life is in danger. If a woman is raped, and I'm happy that I'm talking to all the ladies today, maybe I should take the time to wish all the fathers happy Father's Day. Tomorrow is Father's Day, and today we celebrate them in our congregations. I see Dr. Stevens has now joined us, so let me just take a minute here to bring Dr. Stevens into the frame. Dr. Stevens, good afternoon. Welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon, Pastor. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back Let's Talk. I'm a fan, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion this afternoon.
All right, wonderful. I understand you're one of our most regular listeners.
Yes, I am.
All
It's
right.
a ritual.
So I was just asking the question, Dr. Stevens and others, if a woman is raped, or if the person who is pregnant is a minor, let's say 13 years old, and becomes pregnant, sorry about that, how traumatic can that be for the victim? Whether it's a situation where a young person gets pregnant, 13-year-old, sometimes I even hear as young as 11 years old, or a woman who is raped. How traumatic can that be? Can somebody talk us through this? I should call her name. Sister Henry, Women's Ministries Director, go ahead.
Oh, certainly. This would be the first thing that comes to mind. Really, is that child has lost its childhood, which has mental health implications. The child has lost its childhood. And then now the child is predisposed to self-destructive behavior as well, because now they have no sense of value, their self-worth has been eroded. And you will now see a lot of high-risk behaviors coming to play. And this is not touching the parenting skills or anything. This is just the personhood of the mother. And I guess the social worker, Sister Beverly Chan, could add to this, but those are some of the effects that come to mind immediately for me.
Okay, I should have mentioned that you're also the Children's Ministries Director, so I see you're speaking from a child's perspective. Sister Chan,
that's right.
Let's say it's an adult now who was raped. Rape is, I suppose, traumatic enough. But if the rape results in pregnancy, what are the issues that we're dealing with today?
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. This is a slippery slope. And unless you have experienced the phenomena, it's very difficult to explain it. In my own experience, in terms of working with women who experience incest in their childhood or pregnancy as a result of being raped, the mental and emotional pain is impossible to describe. You only know and can relate to that pain out of experience. To give an example, I was having a workshop once with a group of women and be talking about these issues. And the woman who took, she just started to feel sick. And then for the first time, she was 35 years old. She's going to reveal for the very first time that she was sexually abused by her father at the age of 12. And she became kind of promiscuous and ending up having a child out of a rape. Now, this lady could not stay to the end of the program. She couldn't hear it. We call that erection, because every time you hear or you witness this, it comes back in real time. In terms of having a child.
Okay, Sister Chan, I think Sister Chan, we got
that child begins rejection from in the womb. That's fun.
Okay, we got your first contribution there. It seems as if your internet is creating a little challenge, so we're going to take you a little later on. But what the point you made there is a very important point. Now, you mentioned cases relating to incest and the like. And perhaps I can just ask our attorney, when we're dealing, of course, we are discussing abortion, but there are implications to all of these things, rape and incest and child abuse. These are legal matters. But we find so many persons who may be raped or individuals who experience incestuous relationships, that they don't say anything. Attorney, this is a this has serious legal implications, but, and I think everybody knows it, but why is it that people still keep quiet?
Oh, a lot of reasons, Dr. Greene. I think when it comes to incest, particularly, obviously the overarching reason is the same as most other rapes. No one really wants to talk about it. They're afraid. They don't think they have a voice. But when it comes to incest itself, there's an added component to it, which is that the family structure. So there's a sense from the victim that if they speak, they're going to break up some functioning family structure. So if I was to give an example, we had a case where a biological father, was raping his daughter from the time she was about 9 years old. And when she was, I think, 12 or 13, she became impregnated with his child. And the family was together in a sense that her mom and dad were married and they had children. And now, because of his abuse of this, of the minor, now they have a child. So the thing is kind of like, well, if she said nothing, and she didn't, I think it was discovered through community observation. It's sort of like, if I say something, what happens next? You know, do I have to leave the home? Does my father and mother have to leave? Would my father go away, and would my mother blame me for the fact that my father is gone? Which actually does happen. There, unfortunately, a lot of situations where, especially in the incest type situation, where the victim is blamed for their actions in breaking up the family. A lot of times they are sent to other places to be with other families so that the family structure could exist the way it was before. And so for all these reasons, when the victim experiences the rape and have to think forward, what will happen if I say something? That in and of itself, you know, sort of serves as some inhibition to them wanting to speak and wanting to come forward. And then obviously the embarrassment of it. Like, who really wants to tell someone that my dad and I were having sex? You know, it's not just embarrassing for the father or the mother or whoever it is, but it's also embarrassing to the child, however young they may be and however much we may think that it's not their fault. For them, it's still a sort of embarrassment, and they're in that age where embarrassment is a big deal. So these are some of the things that I think they consider.
Well, Dr. Stevens, I want to bring you in here. We are discussing abortion, yes, and we're going to get to it just now. But this has haunted me for a long time. If you're a physician, a family physician, if a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old turns up to your office or to the general hospital and says, listen, I'm pregnant, is there something in the law that says that you're obligated to ask, who is this child for? And because I see so many young children having children, and I don't hear of any fathers being arrested or so on for having children with these underage ladies. So is that something the physicians are supposed to do, or the nurses or the health authorities? What happens?
So that's a very good question. And to be honest, the last time I looked into this, it was actually on the books. It was illegal, and it was the duty of the physician or the nurse on duty, usually the head nurse, the one who's in charge of the ward. When she becomes aware of it, she's actually supposed to call a social worker who would then call the police. But to be honest, this does not happen because a lot of people have recognized in our small society, there's a lot of hush down, there's a lot of friend involved, there's a lot of political political issues going on, and they don't want to bring embarrassment to different households, different families who they thought were quote unquote upstanding. And so I've had the issue with a minor when I was an intern, and I asked that question. I said, well, aren't we supposed to call the police? Are we supposed to report it to the social worker? And I was told, girl, you better just take care of your patient and leave everything else. And that shocked me. And I asked further questions, and it was actually shut down right here in Antigua. And I'm going to be just honest about that. But based on the books, it's supposed to be reported. That's what I know.
Okay, that is unfortunate, but let's move on. So when you have a situation now, ladies, where this minor is raped and there's pregnancy, and let me further complicate it. Let's say, we often view rape as something a man does to a woman. But what if you have a situation where a female teacher manipulates his or her 16 or 17, well, female teacher can't be his, but a female teacher manipulates her 16 or 17-year-old male student into having sexual relations with her, and she becomes pregnant. Now, given that the to-be father is a minor, should he be forced to become a father? Does he have any say in what happens in this pregnancy? I don't know who that almost sounds like maybe it's the attorney. I don't know. What happens here, ladies?
Dr. Greene, I think you have a very creative mind. Not necessarily, because it has happened before. We've heard of cases. One of the more popular ones that we've heard of is the Mary Kay Letourneau case.
Yes.
That they have a whole movie and everything. And I think recently the guy was interviewed and about his experience and etc. But it obviously is treated differently to the situation of, man versus girl. And obviously, because in that sense, when it's a female, the female is really, your only two choices is to have the child or abort it because it's your body. But with the male, you're not necessarily the one carrying a child. And just generally, the male has much more flexibility in terms of whether or not they are in a child's life. And so I think in a situation like that, a lot really depends on the route that the parent takes, the parent of that minor take. So you may have some parent that would say, well, they may deal with the teacher through the whole criminal justice process, maybe sue them civilly and sue the schools, sue the school district, all of that because of what happened to their child. But on the back end, they may independently choose to accept the child as their son's child or as a grandchild, or they may say, in that moment, I don't want to be a part. So oftentimes when you have a situation like that, especially where the male is that young, like 13 or 14, a lot of what happens next depends on what their parent decides to do. And unfortunately or fortunately, it just depends on how you look at it. That child really does not have much of a voice to that regard. Now, they may within themselves be excited about the fact that, they're getting a child. We don't know what sort of feelings they may have had for this teacher, because, with males, they get some sort of validation from the fact that an older teacher is somewhat interested in them. And so just going through that process of and even to have a child, males do take pride in having children. And I don't know how that manifests itself at such a young age, but that is a reality. Did Dr. Greene drop off? Or is it just me? Dr. Greene, are you there?
So I think he dropped out a little bit.
Okay, well, I guess I'll continue to talk until he comes back on. Yes, I was saying that we just don't know what direction a parent will take, and I think a lot depends on that. I think we've seen situations where males are a part of the child's life, and I think that did happen in the Mary Kay LaTurner case to some extent. Once all of the noise around what had happened died down, I think they got married, and at some point, once the child became emancipated, they lived together. They had other children, to my understanding. And so in that regard, it seems like the male had much more of a say in the direction that was taken. But when you have a 13, a 12-year-old, it's hard to really say what will happen if the parent is involved. I guess until Dr. Greene comes back on, I know one of the points that we would want to mention on this topic is what's the church's stance on abortion. And I know as the Women and Children's Ministries Director, Sister Henry, you can probably tell us, tell our audience what that is.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, certainly, Sister Natasha, you are an excellent co-host.
Mm-hmm.
Look at this.
You're fulfilling Dr. Stevens' prophecy. Oh, certainly, certainly. I would love to share the church's position. Of course, there is a lot of debate about this. And actually, it's an amendment. Because, yes, it was changed somewhat before from the one that existed before. So quickly, if I could share that even as the church sought to address this issue, of course, they had to identify several biblical principles, right? And I will quickly highlight those as we go further into what it actually posits. The first biblical principle, number one, is that God upholds the value and sacredness of human life. And one scripture text I could share quickly with that comes from Genesis 1:27. And the biblical principle number two, the will of God regarding human life, is expressed in the 10 commandments. And I know everyone could say what this text would be, right? Thou shalt not kill, certainly. It comes from Exodus 20:17. And the third principle is that God considers, and this one is germane to our discussion this afternoon, God considers the unborn child as human life. And I personally, I want to interject here that I had a very, very personal experience with this very text, Psalm 139:16. And if I can share quickly, my son, when I had my son, he was just about a year old. And one day my mother came to me, she said, Debbie, you are going to get a baby girl. And she proceeded to describe this baby girl in detail. Now, I wasn't pregnant. I was nowhere close to being pregnant. And she described this baby girl in detail. 1 year and a half later, I got my daughter, and she was just as my mother described. Exactly. And incidentally, my mother never lived to see her. So she never saw her. So I always tell my daughter, I tell her that Psalm 139:16 is her text, because the psalmist says, before I was even formed, you saw my unformed body. So yes, we uphold the fact that God considers the unborn child as human life. Number four, the fourth biblical principle I will share is that God is the owner of life and human beings are his stewards. And a quick text to support that comes from Psalm 50, verse 12. And then moving on quickly, the fifth principle I will share is the Bible teaches that we should care for the weak and the vulnerable, and everyone knows that, right? be a voice for the voiceless. And what an important text this is when it comes to the unborn. Care for the weak and the vulnerable. And then number 6, it is God's nature to protect, preserve, and sustain human life. Colossians 1:17. Now, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, therefore, considers abortion out of harmony with God's plan for human life. Now, listen carefully and follow through to the end. Don't run off with this statement. The Seventh-day Adventist Church considers abortion out of harmony with God's plan for human life, simply because it affects the unborn, it affects the mother, the father, immediate family members. It's against who God is. However, in keeping with the Bible, our church espouses the fact that sin has caused wide-ranging, devastating, and degrading effects on creation. We acknowledge that, which includes our human bodies. And we have heard incidences of the depravity, even in our discussion this afternoon with the cases that were shared by our attorney and our doctors. Now, consequently, and I'm quoting here directly from the statement, consequently, in rare and extreme cases, this is reading from the policy, human conception may produce pregnancies with fatal prospects and or acute life-threatening birth anomalies that present individuals and couples with exceptional dilemmas. Decisions in such cases may be left, listen carefully, decisions in such cases may be left to the conscience of the individuals involved and their families. These decisions, however, should be well informed and guided by the Holy Spirit and the biblical view of life outlined in the biblical principles. And we summarize the position by saying that God's grace promotes and protects life. Individuals in these challenging situations may come to him in sincerity and find direction, comfort, and peace in the Lord. And that is how I could quickly sum up the statement. Lots of discussion and can be expanded, of course, but in the interest of time, these are some of the key parts that I have highlighted.
So we've heard the church's perspective and some biblical quotes regarding the church's stance and the biblical stance about abortion. Now, Dr. Stevens, what in your experience are some of the issues that women deal with, that would cause someone, a Christian person or any person, even in spite of that biblical stance, would give them pause in terms of whether or not they want to keep a child, or whether they want to go the route of abortion? What are some of the issues you, in your experience, have seen come about that lead them to that sort of decision?
Mm-hmm. That's a very excellent question, because a lot of us from the Christian standpoint will think that, okay, abortion is just black and white, but it really is not. There's certain medical condition that may be occurring with the mother and even the unborn fetus that may not be able to preserve life in either one. So let's start with the mother. The mother can have some medical conditions, and there are a handful of them that we really look at risk. Health is at risk. And I have actually had a situation like that even in my internship. And it was advised by the entire team that we perform what you call a therapeutic abortion in order to save the mother's life. There were two instances. One young mother and another with the life was spared, the other one did not survive. But actually, there was a third one because she decided she was not going to do it. She was going to, and thankfully, on medical advice, this is not something that we are going to take lightly. We're going to look at everything that is before us health-wise in terms of cardiac issue. You also have severe high blood pressure. And in pregnancy, it can lead to what you call preeclampsia. That is where when the pressure is so high in the mother, it actually causes her health to be at risk and also the baby's health to be at risk. So as the pregnancy progresses, we would advise the mother that it would be best to terminate the pregnancy because both of their lives could be lost. And then you have things like bleeding. For no reason, the mother is pregnant and all of a sudden, whether it's due to some uterine rupture or cervical rupture, the cervix, there's a lot of bleeding and we cannot arrest that bleeding. And so in order to save the mother's life, we have to terminate the pregnancy. And also there's infection. Sometimes we have some various issues with the amniotic sac. That's a sac that the baby lives in that has all this fluid. It could puncture and then bacteria could get up to the sac and cause it to be infected. And it can cause mother to have an overwhelming infection in the body called sepsis. And that would put her life at severe risk. And that is another reason why we would tell the mother, your life is at risk. We would educate her about the pros and cons, and then severely advise her that that is the best recourse. And then you have problems with the infant. So we mentioned fetal abnormalities. We have a lot of chromosomal problems that could occur with the baby. Welcome back, Pastor Greene. A lot of chromosomal problems. I'm sure we've all heard of trisomy 21. That's livable. That's what we call Down syndrome. But we have what you call trisomy 18, which is called Edwards syndrome. And if the baby is deemed to have that disease, then the life outside of uterus is not possible. On average, they live for 3 days to 2 weeks. And so we will have a chat with the mother and advise the mother that it's best to terminate the pregnancy. And then we have other abnormalities such as ancephaly. That is when the baby is developing, but the brain is not developing. Once we see that on ultrasound, we would advise the mother to terminate the pregnancy. And we have what you call renal agenesis. That's when both kidneys do not develop. And so the fetus will not be able to live out of utero in that condition. So those are the three main types: the trisomies, the lack of brain, and lack of kidneys. We would have persons who would want to argue a lot for the emotional aspect, and I can't speak a lot to that because there's so many issues regarding that. The mother's health when she's pregnant, especially what Pastor Greene spoke about earlier in terms of incest or rape. And those things you have to look at. But from the medical standpoint, we have issues with the mother and issues with the baby that will put them at severe risk. They would die if the pregnancy is not terminated.
Okay, ladies, I just want to thank you so much for holding things together. I'm not sure I could explain what happened just now, but we live in a world where things go wrong, and sometimes they say, when things can go wrong, they will go wrong. So thank you so much for that interesting discussion. I want to ask just a follow-up question there on the matter of the reasons. You spoke about medical reasons why you may want to terminate a pregnancy. Now, in a situation like that, and if you said this before while I was out, forgive me, but in a situation like that, when you say to a mother, to a pregnant lady, listen, here's the situation, your life is in danger or the child's life is in danger, as the case may be, we are recommending abortion. If the mother says, I don't want to abort this baby, what are your options?
Okay, we have no option but to support the mother. We give her all the information that we can. And I have had 3 examples that I shared earlier. And interestingly, it was one mother who heeded to the advice and she survived. The second mother didn't, she passed. And the third mother, she did not heed to the advice. And today the child is 10 years old. But when we sit down and give the mother all the information, we want her to make an informed consent to have this abortion. And sometimes it's an emotional thing. It's a big decision to make. But at the end of it, we have to respect her choice and we have to support her in whatever that choice is.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much. I think the issue here for us is, do I keep this child? Do I not keep this child? What are the implications? There's some people who say that under no circumstance should you abort the child because you're dealing with murder. If you abort a child, you're dealing with murder. Now, Dr. Stevens, you mentioned that there are issues where a physician may recommend an abortion, and then there the psychological effect. I raised the question earlier about this minor, and especially in the case of incest, where you have a father being also the grandfather. So when a child has to say, my father and my grandfather are the same person, that just sounds wrong, So the Seventh Adventist Church, and Sister Henry, I want to come to you now. The Seventh Adventist Church has a position on abortion. We know it's a hot potato. We know it's a challenge. But could you just provide a brief summary for us?
Right. Well, when you were out, that's what we actually talked
about. Oh, you
about
did that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But I want to quickly say that the church also encourages the members to take an active part in this issue regarding mothers who have to face abortion, or the persons who decided to keep their children. They encourage us to take a very, very active and supportive role, and they have actually identified some ways that this can be done. So yes, it not only addresses it from a medical point of view, but from a community of faith, what they would like us as believers to do for these women.
Okay, so I want to go back to a matter that we started discussing in part 1, but did not get time to complete it. In our world today, many persons think that it is irresponsible to teach abstinence as the only option for persons before marriage. I'm aware that everyone listening may not be Christians and may not be guided by the same principles that we are guided by, but the discussion on abortion is today, in many places in our world, a very hot potato. Some persons get real heated on this matter. But should we not focus more on responsible sexual behavior? And if so, what might that look like? When we consider the implications of a person getting pregnant, there are these circumstances. I'm going to come back to this in a while, where there's rape, and I see a question on that. There's rape, there is incest, etc. But I was listening to a part of the debate over coming out of the Roe versus Wade issue. And I noticed that some folks are saying, listen, the woman has a right to determine what she wants to do with her body, and it is solely the right of the woman to make a decision. Now, I'm not going to get into the pro-life and pro-choice debate here, but what I'm asking is, as Christians, should we not be putting more emphasis on education? And as I said before, there are so many persons who think that we are old-timeish if we talk about abstinence, but should it be, I'm pregnant, what do I do? Or inform people so that they can make responsible choices?
I think we should have a mix of different things. I think that we are relatively good in terms of the biblical education. I think we could add a little bit more of the practical, you know, how these sort of behaviors that Christ have spoken about, how it manifests itself in reality. Because I think, at least for this generation, reality is what really is the key, you know. I think Sister Chan, when she gave her testimony, I think it really, really hit home, you know, like, and so many other considerations that are there in making these type of decisions, having these types of experiences. And I think it's powerful for her to have shared that, because I think that in and of itself could have deterred someone, you know, from making an unwise decision. So in that sense, you know, we have the biblical education that we get from Pathfinders AY. And then now we have someone who can give us the real practical before we have to go through it. You know, before I had a daughter, like, you know, I wanted children, but a lot of the experiences I have with having a child, I would not have known if I didn't have one. And I think that's the same with a lot of experiences, early pregnancy, abortions. People don't know it. And I think we need to start to add that. And maybe it may take people like Sister Chan being more open to share their personal experiences as well. And then once we have that, we need the support. So I think a lot of times where some of us may have had that cookie cutter type life, you know, you've never been pregnant, never had an abortion, you know, you got married, had kids, have the house on the hill, you know, we act as if we can't relate to, have nothing to say to someone who's had an adverse experience. And I think that if we can add a little bit more empathy to those experiences, if it does happen, if the teaching has failed, if the life experiences have failed, at the very least, we have the support, you know, and even through that support, it can be sort of a deterrent to further behavior. Now, some people see the support as acquiescing to the behavior, but not necessarily, you know, that's not the case a lot of times. So I think it's a leveled approach that we need to take. And I think to some extent we need to learn how to do that because we've done it differently for so many years.
Well, I have to say that Sister Chan is special, and people like her are very special. You know, to be able to come in a program like this and say, listen, I have been a victim of abortion, and this is what happened. And what you're saying, Attorney Baker, is so important, because when a person shares their personal experience, it's just a mouthful. But there's so many other individuals who are afraid, we can understand why, to share their personal experience. Now, I want to go back a little bit to a conversation I had with a group of ministers from different denominations. We were at a seminar and we were discussing at lunch. This was an interdenominational conference, and we were discussing at lunch the whole issue of abortion and you know, unwanted pregnancies and the like. And when one minister said that they on Saturdays distribute condoms to barber shops and the like, and some of us said, really? You know, another minister said, well, you all might say what you want, because at the end of the day, people will have sex. Now, it's interesting that he mentioned that, because in his faith, the pastors don't marry. But the point he was making is, we live in a world where there are all kinds of sexual perversions. And in spite of all of the education that is out there, people still get pregnant out of wedlock. People still experience unwanted pregnancies. Now, as a church, we teach responsible behavior. We are also saying that one must not judge. If a person engages in an abortion, what needs to happen is that we need to give support. Similar to when a person gets a divorce, sometimes we like to come to conclusions and make judgment statements when what the people need at that particular point is really encouragement. But I do want to just, before our time runs out, take a few questions that some of our viewers are asking. And so I'm going to ask this one first. What happens if someone gets raped and doesn't want to keep the baby? I suppose maybe that was answered, I don't know, but somebody asked it, so let's go. What happens if a person gets raped and doesn't want to keep the baby?
Permit me to say just a quick thing that I think the church has a very balanced view, perfectly balanced view of this phenomenon we're discussing. And in terms of, again, it's really at that point an individual choice. It must be made against a background of having been informed. What we find, however, is the church members, the young ones, they have much more access and they tend to gravitate more to the rights, okay? The right, it's my right to decide whether I want child or not. And that has to a large extent desensitize the rightness or the wrongness of the issue that's proposed by the church, okay? It is so popular a conversation. People tend to no longer feel as tormented spiritually and mentally as before. However, you cannot take away a person's decision. God himself, he has the rules, he has the ground rules, there are logical consequences for these behavior. However, it must be made against the background of having been informed. And the last thing I want to say on this is that no one knows the pain a woman goes through, which is usually, except for the grace of God, it is generally life-lasting. Who is the father? When the child asks, and you cannot give an answer of experiences I have were extremely painful, and women who've gone to their death hating their mothers for not knowing who they was. Okay? So that's except for the grace of God, that's long-term, lifelong, devastating news not to be able to tell a child who is the father, whether it's by incest or by rape. So again, the bottom line to that question is.
Go ahead, Sister Chan. What was that?
No, but see, the bottom line to that is no one will take away somebody's right or choice, but it must be made against, as the doctor mentioned, comprehensive understanding the implications and God's logical processes that goes along with it.
Okay, now I'm going to have to ask us to answer these questions quickly. There are a few questions that some viewers have asked and our time is limited. What if you have a situation where a couple, a married couple, have, let's say, 7 children? Things are really, really hard. And I've come across individuals who believe that they should not use contraceptives and the like and so on. And they get pregnant again. And they say, hey, listen, we can't afford this child. We're going to have an abortion. How do you counsel a person like that? Anybody?
Quickly, I would jump in and say offer support. Offer financial support, economic support, parental support, and encourage them to keep that child.
Excellent.
Because if it's simply for economic reasons, that is not in keeping with God's principle to value life. So as a church, as a community of faith, we can come alongside that person and help make the burden easier, or take the burden more or less.
Now, I also want to add, and this is another debate altogether, but encourage them to utilize the contraception. Exactly.
Family planning.
I know that's a big issue. I mean, we had a program on it once, but
after the fact, Pastor Greene, if they're already pregnant, then the
Sure.
country. I mean, we could
For the
encourage.
next one, for the next one.
For the
Okay.
future.
For the
you say that
future.
if
Yes,
I can
for the future.
interject here, if I can interject here, Pastor, you said they don't believe in it. There's so many different types of contraceptives on the market now. We don't have a one size fit all. So as Sister Henry is saying, we just need to sit down and educate them and encourage them to choose one, because economic reason is not an indication for a therapeutic abortion. I have outlined the therapeutic ones, and economic is not one of them. So that would not be right. They do not have any grounds for quote unquote having an abortion, if I should put it like that.
All right, great. Now, here's another question. I wish we had 2 hours this afternoon. Here's another question. I understand that life starts at conception, this person says. Therefore, isn't abortion murder? I suggest the child should be brought to full term and placed for adoption. Now, I don't know on what's the backdrop to this, but let's say you have an incest situation, or you have a rape situation, or even a case where you mentioned, Dr. Stevens, the mother's life or the child's life is in danger. Under every circumstance, do we say no abortion?
When it comes to rape, the individual has a choice. There'll be several persons, several key players involved in the child's life, in terms of social worker, a doctor, even the police, parents. Lots of persons will be involved. But at the end of the day, the child can make the decision along with the parents not to have the child, and the medical fraternity will offer what you call morning after pill, so that would disrupt the possibility of that individual becoming pregnant. And so in that way, it stands as you would never know, because she may not have been pregnant, or she could have become pregnant, but we'll never know. What we do is just give her the morning after pill, so you disrupt any possibility of she becoming pregnant. And in that case, she is not aborting a child, because she would not have become pregnant already. Hopefully we are talking about in the early stages when the rape would have just occurred when she reported it, and we're not talking about months after.
I think that the real issue in a lot of rape cases is that it takes some ladies some time before they get to the point where they can even talk about the fact that they have been raped. So that in a number of instances, it's delayed, and before they realize it, they're already pregnant. You know, I know it's complicated, but I think your point is that there are circumstances under which we allow the lady to make the decision.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Here is another question. Okay, let's hear what we have here. Okay, somebody is asking, saying these kinds of comments from men annoy me. He will never know the trauma because he won't ever be pregnant. How dare him tell a woman to carry a child of rape? Well, I think somebody's venting their feelings there out loud. Maybe we can take a minute to talk about the psychological impact of you know, every day we live in the experience. It must be a challenge, not so?
It's devastating.
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't have much time. In fact, it is time for me to ask you to sum up. So, ladies, I want you each to say a final word to those who are listening, to those who may, and especially to young people who are not married. Say something to them, but make it short, please. So let's start with Sister Chan, Beverly. We'll go with Beverly. We will go with Dr. Baker. Then we will go with Sister Henry and Dr. Stevens.
I just want to say quickly that anything God says that we should not do, it is not for God's benefit, it is for ours. And there are logical consequences for when we go wrong, but God's mercy endureth forever.
Amen. Attorney Baker?
Yes, I agree. And I think that, you know, the God laid what he said in the Bible for a reason. And I know that life is real, but a lot of times when we think about abortion, it stems from some other underlying issue outside of the medical reasons that we discussed. You know, a lot of times is a child wants to abort because they feel they made a bad decision. They need to be that perfect child. So is there acceptance in the home? Is that child made to feel like they can make mistakes and recover from it? Or the abortion is their way out? Maybe it's some infidelity in a marriage. Maybe it comes from fornication or some underlying issue, all which stems back to things that the Bible talk about. So I think at the end of the day, we as a church, we should be as supportive, as educating, as empathetic as we can. And I think once we kind of get a handle on that, and we have to some extent, I think the issues that surround abortion, even within our sphere, can perhaps be curtailed. And so I would encourage us as Christians to kind of think through that and see how we can be a support.
Thank you. Sister Henry?
Yes, I quickly want to say the decision to have an abortion is usually an act of desperation many times. So I want to say to that young person, that young lady who might be tempted, you have options. You don't have to go through with it. There are options. There are people willing to help you carry this burden, and God's grace again is sufficient, and you can make it, and you can still have a future, even though you have a child. So think about it and reach out for help, because help is available.
Wonderful. And Dr. Stevens?
Okay, I endorse everything the ladies said so far. And I just want to say that most of the times abortion occurs among persons who are not married. And so I just want to remind you of 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18, which says, flee from sexual immorality. We know that this is very difficult in today's age, but the closer we stick to God, the better we will become at this. And if we happen to get pregnant, trust God to see us through as well.
Thank you so much. That's a fitting way to close it. Next week, we're closing this chapter on abortion. I'll be talking with the gynecologist and perhaps maybe Dr. Stevens. We're going to be talking about some medical things, ladies' issues, and medical implications of pregnancy and sexual, pregnancy gone wrong, etc. And then after that, we are going to be discussing the whole issue. Another topic altogether, we're going to be talking about fanaticism and the Adventist Church. So keep tuned to Let's Talk, and till next week, may God's blessings be yours.